Welcome everybody to episode number 285 of Goulet Q&A, where fountain pens are still a thing. I'm Brian Goulet here from Goulet Pens to share this meticulously slapdash and succinctly rambling video where I take your fountain pen, ink, and paper questions and answer them as only someone who's devoted an unreasonable amount of their life to fountain pens could. In today's episode, I'm going to be talking about Halloween pen recommendations, since that's coming up in a couple of weeks. How to always align the LAMY logo on the body of your Safaris and All-Stars with the nib. Got a tip for you. Mixing inks across different brands. Who should be messing with their nibs, if anybody. Pocket pen suggestions. What does high maintenance ink actually mean? The impact that TWSBI has had on the pen industry, and costs of manufacturing metal versus resin pens, and all kinds of other good stuff. I got a ton of good feedback back from episode 284, which was the first one that I'd done in 4.5 years. So much feedback. It's like 180 some comments on the YouTube video as of, I'm recording this on Monday. So, after a 3-day weekend, there you go. But anyway, we got LAOC 5270 says, he's back. I've been watching your videos since 2010. That's when I started making videos. And very much missed the Q&A videos. I remember the first time you picked one of my questions during the holidays and was excited you answered my question in Q&A. I think it was 2013. That would have been the first holiday season that I was doing Q&A. So you are an OG. So thank you very much. Glad to be back here. You are who I'm thinking about when I'm making these videos. I'm like, yeah, let's do it. The devotees, the loyal ones. All right. Warner V. Warner V.D. West Huthusian. Oh, sorry, I'm just botching your name there. But anyway, wow, thanks for that phrase, the unreliably commit one, because it perfectly describes so much of what is happening in my own life and how I can respond to it. I can unreliably commit. Well, good. I'm glad I was able to put that to words for you. That is definitely my mantra at the moment. Sister Golden Hair 0727 says, confession, I never clean my pens. I keep the same color ink in most of them, and I clean only when I refill. Been doing this for years, and I don't care. I've experienced no issues. So, if you're cleaning when you refill, that's fine. If you're not changing the color very often and you don't have any problems, that's all you need to do. So I think you're doing just fine. Michelle Higgins 9465 says, I would love an audio podcast of this Q&A video. Much easier for me to keep up with and would work well if it's Q&A and not so much show and tell. That's true. The more I'm showing, the less that's conducive to audio, right? So we'll see. I don't know. I got lots of good feedback about the audio thing. A lot of people were like, I don't really care. I watch the YouTube videos. Other people are like, I care a lot. You should do it. Which basically is exactly what I thought I would get. So nothing miraculous, but I do appreciate all the feedback. It doesn't give me a lot to think about. And then SuitNut1070 says, Q&As are the best. I have a few thoughts I'd love to share. The Q&A format has always been one of my favorites, and I've listened to the vast majority of them while cleaning and tinkering with my pens. It's a great learning experience, and you're a great host. Well, thank you. 2, I love that you used to end with some business questions. I think the fountain pen world tends to attract those people that are intentional in what they do. I agree. And I think there's overlap with how many people are interested in growing a business. Well, that is kind of cool. So I'm happy to take business questions and answer them if I can. I'm not a business expert, but I guess I'm an expert on my business. So take that for what it's worth. I can speak to my experiences at least. I have mixed in some business questions. I'm not sure if you're referring to questions that I've answered like as part of the Q&A or like the question of the week that I did at the very end last week. I don't recall specifically doing business-oriented question of the week for like an extended period of time. I mixed them in, I think. But I remember doing like writing prompts. I did that for a while. Those were not as popular. I did fun facts at the end of the pencast. So I don't know. I could do whatever, kind of at the end of the thing. I just want to give you some little payoff for watching all the way to the end. So I don't know. We'll see. Keep giving me feedback. I'll try a bunch of different stuff and y'all tell me what you like the most. Kind of how this thing works. All right. Faniro 4792 says, it's so good to see you back, Brian. Q&A is great. The main thing is to keep up the Goulet style/spirit on in those difficult times. And the Q&A does it very well. Thank you for your hard work, Brian. We love you very much, and it's a pleasant, useful show you let us enjoy on Friday evenings. Well, I'm very glad, because honestly, this is like what Q&A was originally to be. I mean, in 2013, that's what I wanted it to be. That died with COVID. We brought it back in the form of the Pencast, and now it's evolving again. And, you know, the spirit of it, though, I want to stay alive. Like, honestly, I just love producing this kind of stuff for y'all, answering your questions, talking about pens. It's kind of what I'm made to do. So happy to do it. That said, I got a bunch of questions for you this week, so we're going to roll right into it. First one is from John Ridge 9730 on YouTube. Says, I've been looking for a good Halloween themed pen or a pen that could be used during Halloween and fall. I haven't found one yet that I liked, but if you came across anything, I may be interested. With that said, I picked up the Sailor First Snow Pro Gear Slim this year at the Raleigh Pen Show for use during the Christmas season. So I think holiday themed pens could be popular with some. Yeah, definitely. I think especially if it's like more of a seasonal pen as opposed to like a specific holiday. So I think in general, when we're talking about Halloween, this was the question of the week last week was, do y'all buy Halloween themed pens? I think a lot of the feedback was, you know, people that particularly love Halloween, yeah, they'll buy them. And, you know, some people use them just around Halloween, other people use them year round. But I think in general, a lot of people buy pens that can be themed, like, you know, like the Esterbrook Raven Black. That was the Esterbrook SD Raven. That was one that came up several times. It's not a specific Halloween themed pen, but it's called Raven. It's an all stealthed out black pen that you could use year round and no one would think twice about it. You know, it's not like it has like pumpkins and witches all over it or anything, though. I mean, that's fine if you like those kind of pens. But I think in general, what seems to be most popular around at least a Halloween themed pen that I solicited for last week was people asking, you know, people recommending pens that are like all black or have some black and orange or maybe black and red, you know, just kind of as like a color theming as opposed to like an on the nose Halloween theme and pen. So I do have some recommendations for you, John, based on, you know, some what other people recommended. I kind of went through the website ourselves and found some good ones. So the Esterbrook SD Raven is a good one. Edison Collier Persimmon Swirl is a really nice, it's an orange thing. It's a really popular color. It's a big pen. And so easily recommend that one. That one you can use year round, especially if you like orange. It's predominantly orange. The Monteverde Regatta Sport in orange. That is very much a black and, you know, orange. But, you know, it looks really sporty. It's kind of interesting. It doesn't necessarily look like a holiday pen. And then Delta has their DV Originals. That is orange and black. That's been Delta's theme for decades. So that is always in season. The Diplomat Elox Matrix in orange and black, kind of a cool pen. The Elox Matrix, it's basically the Diplomat Arrow with some different like engraving in it. Cool pen. And if you like the orange and black thing, it's definitely pretty hot. I like the orange, it like pops more than just the regular Diplomat orange Arrow does. The Schaefer Icon in red and black looks kind of cool. Definitely a strong red and black theme going to it. And then this was recommended on the last video, but Sailor Wicked Witch of the West. So it's a purple pen, like a dark purple with, you know, gunmetal trim. Looks really sharp, so it's not, you wouldn't look at it and think like, oh yeah, Halloween, but it has the whole witch theme and stuff like that. So that's one that you could use kind of all the time too. So anyway, these are all pens. They're all like a little bit on the pricier side. I didn't go with like super bargain pens, but these are ones that I thought would be, you know, really nice. So hopefully that's useful to you. All right, Lester Beasley on YouTube says, hey Brian, I got a 30 ml bottle of Goulet exclusive Monteverde Blue Skies ink with the purchase of a pen. So that was a deal that we had last year. Just like I mentioned last week, we have the ink deal with Private Reserve Infinity ink that you can get with Monteverde and you know, Diplomat and Conklin, all the Jaffa brands. Lester says, I really like the ink, the Blue Skies. Does it come in larger bottles? Glad to see Q&A make a comeback. So that one is not available in larger bottles. That's an exclusive ink that we did. We actually took the like hex code for our Goulet Blue, which is like what you see on the wall here. And we had them make an ink that was to match that color. So I'm a fan of the color too, but we just did the 30 ml, you know, and because like Monteverde also does a 90 ml bottle, which we used to lean more towards carrying the 90 ml as the default. And then we carried the 30 on some of the more popular colors, just in case people didn't want to get a whole bottle, but just wanted to try it, sort of a thing. But what we found is like the 30 mil bottles are just like outselling the 90 mils, like 10 to 1 on most colors. They're just so much more popular, which is not how it used to be. You know, I go back 5-10 years and it used to be that the bigger bottles were more popular for most of our brands. But I think now, because there are just so many ink choices out there, people generally are just not necessarily needing a gigantic bottle. So it's not that we couldn't do it, but I don't know. It would have to be like really, really, really popular in order to do it. And it hasn't been a big request just yet for Blue Skies, but you know, we'll give it some thought. And in the meantime, just enjoy 30 mils. All right. Melanie Sullivan has a question from YouTube. Says, oh boy, this is a long question. Okay. But bear with me on this one. There will be a payoff because this is a cool little thing that I got to play with and figure out. All right. Brian, I have a dozen or so LAMY Safaris and All-Stars. Every time I refill or clean one and it's time to screw the pen body back onto the nib, back onto the nib portion of the pen, I have the same problem. I want the LAMY logo at the end of the pen body. Right there. Let's see here. I want the LAMY logo at the end of the pen body to end up on what I consider the top of the pen, the same side as the top of the nib section where you can see the face of the nib, right? So logo lining up with the nib. I am inclined to do this as well, so I totally get it. Now, if I'm holding the nib unit face up, there seems to be no consistency as to whether I should begin to screw the body onto the logo facing up towards the ceiling or down towards the floor. Sometimes I think, oh, on this Mango Safari, I have to begin with the logo facing down, but then I'm rarely correct. If the pen body ends up fully screwed on and the LAMY logo is facing downward, I have to unscrew the body and try again, beginning with the logo facing the opposite direction so that the logo on the body and the nib are both facing upward. I've inspected the threads on the nib units numerous times, sorry I said that weird, and they all appear to be the same as they would be if the same mold is always used. So I've concluded that the variation must be in the pen body where the threads are slightly more difficult to see. So the question is, if the LAMY pen bodies are all made using the same mold, why do I have to screw on starting with the logo upward and some with the logo downward? Are all the bodies molded without the threads and then thrown into a hopper where another machine grabs them to create the threads? There has to be some pattern to it because you always end up with the logo either exactly on the top or exactly on the bottom. Inquiring minds want to know. I know I'm not the only pen nerd out there with the same issue. Thanks in advance. I know you're not the only one with this issue, which is exactly why I took this question. And I'm super pumped to answer it because it's the kind of thing that I have never put as much thought into it myself. I always want to line it up and I just have to try it a couple times usually. But there is a method to the madness and I'm going to pull out my phone and show you a little more detail because I think it's really cool of exactly what's happening. So bear with me and I'll get this thing set up. All right, I grabbed a bunch of LAMYs here. I got some Safaris, got some All-Stars. So here's the deal. I grabbed the new Safari just so I could kind of show you. So what we were talking about, in case you didn't understand a second ago, you got the top of the grip here with the nib. You want to match up the logo to it, right? But if you don't like the logo, you can flip it around the other way, and that's totally fine. Now, the reason that you're always going to end up with one or the other is because this has what's called a double start thread. So if you look here, you can see there where the thread is starting in one spot. So that's on the underside of the nib. And if you turn it around halfway, there's another start. So it's a two-start thread. A lot of pen caps for screw-on caps are what are called triple start threads. Now the reason you have all these different numbers of threads is because, for one, you don't end up with this kind of alignment thing, but then also the more threads that it has, the more starts that it has, the fewer turns that you have to make when you're capping and uncapping the pen. So that's kind of handy, but a lot of internal pen parts here is just a single thread. This one is a double thread, which is kind of unique, but is very consistent with LAMYs. So you also have a double start thread here inside the pen body. So you can see it's right in there. Oh, sorry, it's not wanting to focus 100%, but it's right in there. Boom, boom. And then right over there, right? So you got two starts. So you got two starts on each, which makes sense because then the threads line up. So if you have a Safari, what you need to do is you need to get the thread here to latch up to the thread over here. And if you do that with the logo facing up, you're going to do, let's see here, we'll count it. So it's going to be one rotation, 2 rotations, 3 rotations, and a half. So it's 3.5 rotations to lock in the Safari, which means if you have it logo facing up, you're always going to end up with the logo facing the other way. So you got to flip it around and put it on that way, and then boom, 3.5 rotations, and it's going to be in there. Now, the reason it could be getting opposite is if you have the thread, you can see the thread right there. It's kind of in the middle a little bit, but if you are not quite aligned and you're just a little bit too far, then you're not actually necessarily catching that thread. So if I take it and I go backwards with it, you can see there where it kind of latches in. So, you know, if you're turned more than this much, right? More than this much, which I don't know what, maybe like that much of a rotation. If you're turned more than that when you start it, you could miss that thread and you could actually be starting it facing the wrong direction, and then that could be frustrating. So really you just want to make sure, whichever way you're lining it up, that you're either lining it up straight on or maybe even just back, like back turned a little bit, and then you know you're catching that thread right away. So if you do that with a Safari, you're going to get that logo lined up every time, I believe. Now I haven't tested like every pen out there, but I went back to Dark Lilac. This is a pen that came out years ago, 8 years ago, I believe. Same kind of deal. If I start with it with the logo facing down, have it rotated just a little bit back, put it on there, boom, it's going to line up. And then I got the OG Lamy pink with the circle thing on the top. This thing's probably 15 years old, maybe more. And I'm going to do the same thing here, line it up, maybe just turn it a little bit back to make sure I get that thread, turn it, boom, and it's lined. So you do that and you'll get your Safaris lined up every time. Now, here's where it gets more interesting. All-stars are similar but different, right? So with the All-stars, you have to do something similar. You still have, it's a little harder to see here because it's translucent, but you still have that one start thread there and the second one on the back. So it's still a double start thread. Now this one, oh, sorry, I didn't talk about the Safari here. These are all injection molded. These threads are not cut into these things. And the way that you can tell that they're injection molded is if you, let me see if I can punch in a little bit. The way that you can tell that they're injection molded is you'll be able to see a line where the two halves of the mold meet. Somewhere in there. There you go. See that little line? That's the injection molding line. It should run all the way through the pen. Sometimes it gets polished out, but you can see a little bit of the line there and running through it. If it cuts right through the threads, if that injection molding line cuts through the threads, that means these threads are injection molded, right? And you're going to see the same thing on this part too. If I turn it just a skosh, you'll see that injection molding line in here somewhere. See, it gets like polished off the outside. But pretty much if you ever want to know if a pen is injection molded, if you look at the threads, that's usually where you can tell. Oh, this lighting is just weird because of the video. Can you see that injection molding line? Well, I'm not able to catch it on camera, but trust me, it's there, right? So that's what you're dealing with. All the Safaris, I've seen the factory. I did a Lamy Tour video where you can see some of the injection molding machines work. These suckers come out and they're like done, right? So they're not cutting threads into these things. Now, with the All-Star, it's a little different because it's a metal body pen, and then you have this plastic insert that has the threads cut into it. So technically, that's a separate piece and could be installed any which way, and it could make things confusing. But Lamy's really consistent, so they do it, at least from what I can tell, the same every time. So it is still a double start thread, but it's different than the Safaris because with the All-Stars, it's not 3.5 rotations. So you're going to do logo facing up, like with the nib. So you start it aligned, and then we're going to go 1 rotation, 2 rotations, 3 rotations. It's not 3.5 like the Safaris. So All-Stars are 3 rotations, Safaris are 3.5. If you're switching back and forth between them, and then every now and then you're catching a thread wrong, it's going to seem like they're all over the place, but they're actually not. So this pen, this is the All-Star from this year. This is the Autumn Pink, and it's 3 rotations, right? I got a LAMY Lux here, just so you can see. I don't think they even have this one anymore. This is the gold one, but this thing is like from 2016 or something. I don't know. This goes back a few years, but I grabbed it just to make sure. And I grabbed a whole bunch of different all-stars that I have, and they were all consistent. Boom, 3 rotations, right? And it's aligned. And then I have this ocean blue, which I got as soon as we started Goulet pens. It was one of my first pens, because of course it's blue. And this one is the same kind of deal. Do it 3 rotations, and it's in. So 3 rotations all-star, 3.5 safari. And that should make your life a lot easier. All right, next up, we got, this is another long question, sorry, but this is from DT622 on YouTube. Pilot Iroshizuku inks have long been favorites of mine, and I sometimes darken a color slightly with a dash of Iroshizuku black, the Takasumi, generally by syringing a tiny bit of black directly into the converter. My recent purchase of a fantastic custom 742 with the wettish soft fine nib brought me to the realization that these Pilot inks can be too wet for Japanese paper if the nib itself has a lot of flow. I use this pen in a Hobonichi journal, which uses Tomoe River, I believe. Research led me to a drier brand of Japanese ink, Tag Kyoto. I am not familiar with that, but I'll take your word for it, which is actually a bit too dry for me. So now I find myself darkening one of these colors with the Pilot Black, achieving not only a different color, but a slightly higher flow. Because I'm doing this one refill at a time, I don't want to mix up a whole bottle of a certain color. I don't think I would achieve this control of flow by using an ink wetting agent, which is pretty powerful stuff designed for mixing through an entire bottle of ink at a time. I've heard of some people using propylene glycol or maybe like dish soap. I'm not as crazy about that, but because there's other stuff in there. I've heard some mixed results of that. I've never actually tried using a wetting agent myself, but I know it's a thing that people do. Anyway, so far I'm happy with this system and I don't mind getting slightly different results each time. But my question is it okay to mix different brands of ink? Is there any combination which might harm a gold nib or any types of ink which will be incompatible? Thanks. As far as I know, there's nothing that will have any different effect on a gold nib as opposed to a steel. The only thing that would affect a gold nib that I know of offhand would be an iron gall ink. And even still, the modern iron gall inks that are made are not really like full on super acidic iron gall like you would have with calligraphy pens. So I don't think you need to worry so much about those. Generally speaking, iron gall inks are not the best to leave in with gold nibs for a long period of time, but none of the iron gall inks that we carry at Goulet pens are ones that you need to be like overly concerned about. I've never heard of them being an issue. Is it okay to mix different brands of ink though? The answer is yes and no. Generally speaking, when it comes to mixing ink, it's pretty mysterious, right? Because they don't put what's in these inks anywhere. It's very proprietary. It's like a trade secret as to what these things are made up of. And there's no one blanket rule that I can say like yes or no, you're fine to mix this and not that, unless you basically do it and then you know. So whenever you mix inks, you're kind of always in experimental like territory. Mixing within a brand is generally better, especially if it's within a given line within a brand. But you know, many brands can have different properties. So like, you know, Noodler's is a really good example. Like they have their Bay State series of inks, which are not compatible with anything except Bay State inks. So you don't want to mix regular Noodler's with with Bay State. Will not go well. A lot of it has to do with, I don't know what kind of, you know, chemistry is involved with making these different types of ink, but you can end up with some of that sometimes. And specifically if you have ink with like different properties, I would think maybe you are needing to take a little extra caution there. So my general rule when talking about ink mixing is you kind of approach it the same every time, unless it's ones that you've mixed before that you know are fine. Even if it's in the same brand, I think it's best to always mix it outside of a pen first. Let it sit there for a few hours. See if it has any kind of reaction. See if it gels up. See if it starts to look weird. See if it like crystallizes or has any kind of weird reaction, foams up. I don't know. Some of these things can happen with different inks. Not super common, but you know, it can. Just make sure that nothing crazy happens. And then if it looks totally normal, then you try it in a pen. Maybe not your most like valuable or your hardest to clean out pen, but you know, maybe just a less expensive pen, maybe a cartridge converter pen that you can easily flush out with a bulb syringe, that kind of a thing. Great way to mix up these inks in small quantities is to use ink sample vials. If you may have some laying around, but we also sell spare ink sample vials basically for this reason. Some people like to decant them to carry them around, but some people like to mix inks, and so we do offer those. And we have the ink syringes, which I like because they can be kind of precise, but you can also use the transfer pipettes. Those are good because you can measure it in drops. So the opening on the transfer pipettes is a little larger than the ink syringes. So if you're trying to get a precise number of drops, it can sometimes be a little easier to control that with the transfer pipette. But that's totally up to you. It's just a personal preference thing. So I think if you were to be mixing different brands of ink, especially in different colors, and trying to get like a repeatable ratio, counting the drops is a good way to go. And you can manage that within like an ink sample vial kind of territory. So, but that's basically it. Take your time, experiment, and have fun, and just, see what happens. Tangerine Gin 4568 on YouTube says, would you consider any nib on purchase and assuming undamaged, correctable, personalizable by layman pen users without seeking out a Nibmeister? Okay, so can you personalize your own nib? It's going to depend a lot. In general, no. I would say nib work, if you're talking about customizing, it's going to take some practice and some know-how. Not that it's impossible. I mean, there's nothing truly magical about what's done, but it is very fine work. The tolerances can sometimes not even be perceptible. Actually, a lot of times aren't even perceptible to the eye. You're going by feel or going by result, not even necessarily knowing what you're doing. So there's so much that honestly just has to come with experience and practice when it comes to adjusting these things. Not that anyone can't do it, but the learning curve for doing it is more than just like a single pen. Especially if you're talking about different nib grinds, different types of materials like steel and gold and titanium, stuff like that. Basic tuning and smoothing, if you're just like, you want to align the nib, you want to make it a little bit smoother, make it a little bit rougher. That's all fairly doable by your average person. You just need to look at, a couple different videos that are out there. We've got some basic ones, but nothing too advanced. Just because it's like you start to very quickly get into a territory where people could start like damaging and ruining their stuff. But most anyone can kind of tune and smooth and get a nib working more optimally. Customizing, I think of grinding to a different nib size or making it into a stub or an architect or something like that. That gets a lot trickier, especially on gold nibs. And I would say that it's not going to be easy for most people to do. It's certainly learnable, but without the proper instruction, without some specialized tools, especially if you're talking about increasing or decreasing the ink flow, if you're talking about like widening an ink channel or anything like that, or if you're talking about adding like any flexibility to it, that's all pretty advanced stuff, and you really need to know what you're doing. The learning curve is going to be very steep. But that said, most of the Nibmeisters that I know are self-taught. So you pretty much just get your hands on a bunch of nibs and you go to town. You learn what you can, talk to other nib people, go to pen shows, hang out at the nib, grinders tables, see what they're doing. You'll learn a lot that way. So if you're trying to learn it just for tweaking a pen here and there, honestly, it's probably worth it more just to bring it to a pro, especially if it's a more expensive pen. You don't want the liability of messing with that thing. But if it's something that you're generally interested in knowing how to do, I'm a tinkerer myself. So I like to know how to do that stuff just so that, if I come across my own nibs and just want to tweak them or do something with them, because I have a lot of pens, then I'm gonna lean towards doing it myself. But I've got a lot of different pens that I can access and nibs, and I got the time to, invested to be able to do that kind of thing. So I'm not gonna say like, no, you shouldn't do it, but don't be naive about what it may take to actually be able to do it effectively. But if you're interested in that, learn more. There's some YouTube videos out there. There's some good sites, richardspens.com, Richard Binder's website. He's got some good information about all kinds of stuff, pen repair, nib grinding, that type of stuff. Just read up on that stuff first. Make sure you understand the principles of what you're doing first, and that'll give you more confidence to take some next steps. All right, Dr. Naturalist on YouTube says, I need a suggestion for a pocket pen. I've been using a Kaweco Brass Sport, or Kaweco. I'm inconsistent with how I say that, sorry. Brass Sport for about 5 months, but the cap unscrews in my pocket too often. Oh, interesting. The clip slides off too. Yeah, those clips, it's tough with this brass pen because it's so heavy. Usually with the resin, like just the regular classic sports, not the brass sports, and even the all sports are usually fine. But because of the weight of the brass sport, it's going to tend to want to slide out of that clip, unfortunately. I've added Loctite to the cap, which has marginally helped. The clip has to fit over thick jeans. Yeah, that's going to be tough. So I don't necessarily have advice for you about how to help that brass sport. I don't carry around a brass sport with me regularly, but I could see where the weight of that pen would be an issue as a pocket pen. Unless you just take the clip off and you just carry the thing literally in your pocket. Maybe you'll have better luck. I don't know. But I do have a couple other pen recommendations if you're open to it, ones that I have carried before and could recommend. My favorite one is a Traveler's brass pen. That's my top pick. It's a brass pen, just like what you have. It's a little thinner. And the clip is, definitely got the room for, jeans. I wear it on my own jeans all the time. I've carried that pen for years in my pocket and it's not going to slide off. It doesn't come undone. It's just a friction fit, but I've never had the thing. I'm trying to think if I've ever had that thing come out in my pocket. Maybe once ever. And I'm talking over like 7 years of carrying it. But yeah, that's a really good one. $69. It only comes in a fine nib. So if you want a drastically different nib size, that's where you may not want that option. The other ones that I recommend are the TWSBI Mini or the TWSBI Mini AL, or maybe the TWSBI VAC Mini. So you're looking at the $50, $60 range for all of these. Now they're resin pens. So if you're like really hard on your pens and you want the metal ones, I would lean towards the Travelers. But if you want more nib size options, you want a higher ink capacity, the Mini and the VAC Mini are gonna be like unbeatable. They carry a ton of ink and would have a strong enough clip to be able to last in a pocket, I think. Might get a little bit scratched up just with use because, it's resin, but they're still pretty dang durable. So I don't know, give those a look and let me know what you think. Next question, Ash16Lily23 on YouTube says, what do you mean when you say an ink is high maintenance? I hear that term a lot, but what does it actually mean? Is it hard to clean? Is it gum up pens? Or just don't leave it inked up for a year without using it frequently? It makes me so nervous to try some really amazing looking inks. Well, don't be too nervous. I mean, high maintenance doesn't mean like gonna hurt your pen necessarily. It's kind of a catch-all term. I think just meaning like this ink requires more attention and work than a normal ink might. It's gonna mean different things to different people though. I use the term somewhat as a catch-all. Generally though, I would say it refers to how easy it is to clean and maintain in the pen. So the cleaning work, if it's going to have a tendency to want to stain or clog or, barnacle up in the pen, if it dries out easily and doesn't want to start in a pen, these are all things that might make an ink more high maintenance. Or maybe it's one that, tends to nib creep a lot, or it just really loves to like spurt into the cap as you carry it around. Some inks are just, the surface tension is a little less and it just, likes to move around in the cap and get on your grip. And so when you uncap it, there's ink on your grip and stuff like that. That's generally what you're referring to as high maintenance. It could also maybe mean that it doesn't dry as quickly, has more of a tendency to smear, or if it's like a heavy sheening ink or a shimmer ink and, that stuff can smear and you end up getting, ink, on your fingers or all over the place. Organic Studio Nitrogen is like notorious for being a super smearer. We've seen pictures of people that have it on their dog and their light switch and their doorknob and all that kind of stuff because they touch it, it gets on their fingers and then it like travels around. So that's high maintenance, right? Essentially just means that you have to take extra consideration or extra care than you would for a normal ink. I don't think it's anything you should be afraid of. Mostly it's just more work to deal with these inks. And most of them is not even that extreme. I use nitrogen as an example. It is an extremely popular ink because it looks amazing on paper, but it's also high maintenance. I think also like because it's so high maintenance, it's also got like a little mystique to it, and people just got to see what it's about for themselves. So, some inks are kind of worth the trouble. Noodler's Bay State Blue is another one that like gets a lot of attention because it's high maintenance. I would say the best rule of thumb is if you want to use any of these, it sounds like you're interested in trying some higher maintenance inks. That's great. You can get some samples of it, not make a huge investment. Try it in a less expensive pen, one that's easier to clean out, maybe a Platinum Preppy, Lamy Safari, something like that. They're going to be able to take pretty much whatever you throw at them. Then you get a chance to use them, learn about their quirks, and then you'll basically be fine from there, and you can use it in whatever pen you feel comfortable in. So I wouldn't let it intimidate you to trying out some really cool inks because honestly, some of the high maintenance inks are the most fun. But it's up to you whether you think it's going to be worth that work or not. All right, got a few more. Suit Nut 1070 on YouTube says, have you seen TWSBI disrupt the market for fountain pens? I'm probably not alone in thinking that they've brought a consistency and reliability that's almost unmatched in other brands at that price point. How has TWSBI influenced the market, if at all? So TWSBI's been around with the TWSBI model pens. They were an OEM manufacturer making pens and stuff for years, like decades before they made their own branded pens. But they've made their own TWSBI branded pens for the last 15 years. And I definitely would say that when they first came on the market, they were pretty disruptive. They got a lot of attention. No reasonably priced piston filling pens, especially demonstrator pens like that looked as clean, that had that nice of a packaging. I mean, you had some piston filling Noodler's pens that were more affordable, but they definitely did not have the same like fit and finish and all that kind of stuff. I don't even think that most people really compared them to TWSBI. But mostly you were talking like other piston filling pens were in the, basically gold nib territory. You had your like a Pelican M200s and you had stuff like that, but you're easily 3 times the price of what TWSBI's were. So it was very, very disruptive in the beginning. And then they disrupted themselves. They came out with first it was 530 and then it became 540, 580 now as the latest iteration of it. That's what's been out for over a decade. And then, the VAC and other stuff like that. And then they came out with the Eco. The Eco was a disruptor to the 580. It was, in my opinion, just as good of a pen, but less expensive. So TWSBI's been a bit of a disruptor. I think they want to innovate. They want to bring really affordable pens to the masses. They're not a brand on par like size wise, like Pilot or Lamy or anything like that. But they're definitely like an established brand within the like pen enthusiasts, out there. Part of what they had in their disruption as well was direct distribution. So a lot of bigger manufacturers, especially if they're selling internationally, they'll focus on manufacturing, obviously design and manufacturing, and then they will link up with what are called distributors, basically people who run like local territories. It might be a whole region or even like a whole continent, that are then, essentially, buying stuff off of the manufacturer and then distributing that, to retailers, usually like us. So not all brands do that, and it seems like, okay, there's like links in the chain and stuff like that. But I will tell you, like when it comes to packaging and marketing and photography and, warranty and all this stuff, especially just like dealing with taxes and currency conversion rates and all this kind of stuff, shipping, it gets pretty complicated. And to manage that as a manufacturer globally is really complicated and really hard. So that's why you have distributors, and then retailers are doing all the customer service and all the, other stuff too. So it's like, there is a reason why there's all these like steps in the process. And I know that from doing it 15 years now, but TWSBI went the route of first they were selling direct. So they were manufacturing, selling direct to customers. They still do. That in of itself, that's less crazy today because there's a lot of brands doing that, especially post-COVID. But that was pretty innovative in the pen world back then. So that was a little bit disruptive, and they're, because they were doing that, they essentially like cut their price down to make it more disruptive. That's a lot of where they were able to make their prices lower, was just less overhead. There's trade-offs with doing it that way, but that's what they've done, and it's really important to them to keep doing that, which is why, they do limit their retailership to a degree. They still sell direct. We had kind of an interesting time with that in the beginning because we felt like maybe we were competing a little bit with our own distributor. But we over time have really learned to appreciate that, and we've worked with them directly, and it's okay. They increase their production as well. So it used to be like we would sell out of stuff almost immediately and then not get restocked for a while. And then people get frustrated and, all that kind of stuff. But they've really done a great job recently. It's like they've got a well-oiled machine, it seems. And so, I think at this point it's more established and it's less crazy or radical, but they really have been consistent and kept a pretty affordable brand for a long time. And they're like very legit manufacturer. A lot of other pens that are kind of in that price range that have some of the same features, a lot of them are not being manufactured directly. They're being made, outsourced from somewhere, and then white labeled with some other brand. So that's part of how you can get some efficiency as well. Essentially, cutting out a distributor. As a retailer, I could take a pen design and go directly to a factory that makes pens and say, "Can you make me this pen?" And I will sell it directly. It gets difficult because you have to buy pretty large quantities to be able to do that. And sometimes there's huge investments of capital to make that happen, especially if you're talking like injection molds and stuff like that. Some of the injection molds that you do for a given pen can cost like $50,000 to $100,000 a piece. And that's a huge investment. You got to sell a lot of pens to pay back for that. So, that's where it doesn't always make sense to cut out those links in the chain. But TWSBI has done a pretty darn good job over the last 15 years of balancing that out. And so, I definitely think they've had some impact there. I don't think it's been like massively disruptive to everybody. I think they've found a nice place for themselves and maybe have disrupted some parts of it, especially pens in like that $30 to $50 range. Certainly they're going to be competitive with just about anybody there. But it's not like we're not selling LAMY Safaris anymore, and it's not like nobody's interested in, Diplomat Magnums and, whatever other things in that price range people might be interested in. I think TWSBI is just like a very strong contender in that place, but even still, it's one type of pen. Not everybody wants that style. People like to have different stuff. So that's okay. I think, the rising tide raises all ships. That's kind of everything I would say in this industry. Just like I, as a retailer, if I'm making videos like this, it's going to help everybody because, we all love pens and we all want to talk about them. And our biggest risk is falling into obscurity. So, if there's people innovating, if there's companies innovating, making interesting pens, getting people excited about them, retailers are out there talking about them, promoting them. Y'all are out there talking about them. Like that's all good for everybody. So you kind of can't lose. Like, I think it's good. Now, some other impact that I think TWSBI's had has been on the popularity of demonstrators and affordable piston pens. So I think that has definitely, it's hard to isolate out that, especially on the demonstrator side of things, because it's not like they came up with a demonstrator. It's been around for a long time. But I do think anecdotally, just from my own observations, that demonstrator pens are more popular now or more available now than they were when TWSBI first started making. I think they made them more ubiquitous. I think people always wanted them. They just didn't have access to as many of them. And then when TWSBI came out, the popularity of them and all the different varieties they did, that gave, credence to other manufacturers doing the same thing. So now more demonstrators are much more available. And I think we're all just like, yeah, keep it going. So I do think that they've had some impact on that. Exactly how much I can't really say. It's kind of hard to isolate that. But yeah, so I think they've definitely had an impact, largely for the good. But I'm also very biased because we sell them. So, but I wouldn't sell them if I didn't believe that they were good. So take that for what it's worth. All right, Esoterica 1693 said on X, formerly Twitter, what are the differences in manufacturing costs or production technique between metal sections and other materials? I prefer non-metal in looks and feel. Why do so many pens have metal? So when you say sections, I tend to think of like grip section, the part that you actually hold with your fingers. But I think in the context of your whole question, you're talking about just like overall the pen body, just all the parts and stuff. So I think that a lot of people prefer non-metal, especially in the fountain pen world. I feel like it's interesting. It depends on your region, right? Like I know in the US, generally speaking, we tend to associate quality with weight and heft and durability, So generally speaking, if you have a heavier pen, you will think higher quality, even if it's just kind of subconscious. May or may not be true at all, but I do think that there's a lot of people that kind of lean that way. It's not the case elsewhere in the world. So it does kind of vary a bit. But I do think that because weight often can subconsciously, if nothing else, lead to a higher perception of value or quality, that makes for a decent default. Make it out of metal, it's going to be heavy and it's going to be durable. So I think that's why a lot of manufacturers may like that and may go to it, especially if you're talking like rollerball pens and ballpoints and stuff like that. People aren't thinking about that maybe as much or as unintentionally as fountain pens. Fountain pens, the nibs themselves, it's a much more intentional writing experience. You're consciously paying much more attention to the feel and all that kind of stuff. So you're more discerning when using a fountain pen, generally speaking. So I do think that the material that it's made of matters more for us fountain pen folk than it would for most others. But because rollerballs and ballpoints are way more dominant in the industry, the default is going to be metal pens. It's more consistent to work with. You have, probably apply with fewer issues, maybe, depending on the material, fewer issues in the manufacturing process. The economies of scale, like investment equipment, that can all come into effect as well. If you're an individual maker, like thinking about some of the ones, that we know in the fountain pen world, you are essentially like turning one pen on a lathe at a time. And resin is going to be easier to do that. It's easier on your tools. It's a little faster. You can change up the materials. You can change up the colors a lot. That's going to be arguably easier, cheaper to do than trying to make it out of metal. You really got to be specialized, and your precision in metal is going to be pretty intense. And in terms of like mass production, injection molding can be extremely efficient. So that's where you get into like the platinum preppies and stuff like that. Those are all injection molded. You can just crank those things all day long. LAMY Safaris, those are good. Whereas, the All-Stars are more expensive. Like they're essentially not that different of a pen than a Safari, but because they're made out of metal, it's a little more work, not as quick and easy to do as it is injection molding, some ABS plastic like the Safaris. So I think actually fountain pens can be conducive to being not metal for those reasons. But as I mentioned, a question or two ago, the cost of the molds can be extremely expensive. So you really got to be cranking out a ton of pens to have the resin pens, have a much greater economy of scale. So I don't really know. I'm not a manufacturer. I know it to be dangerous. I will say that the durability really matters a lot, especially with fountain pens. These are not just like throwaway pens. So I think anything that's gonna last a little bit. Resin is great. It's beautiful. It's lighter weight. You can do a lot more with the designs and stuff like that, which is why I think you actually see a lot of fountain pens that are not metal in general, at least like the real enthusiast fountain pens, there's still metal out there, but a lot more of the metal that you see is going to be on components that are dealing with stress. So threads, center bands, clips, nibs, that's the stuff where there's wear and tear, there's pressure, there's, tension, compression, these things. Metal is going to be by far the best material that you can have those in. So that's why you end up with, a pen like, your custom 743 here. It's going to be mostly resin, but you're going to have metal components where there's going to be points of strain. Now these threads are not metal, so they are resin. So that's kind of cool. But there's a center band because, it needs to be able to withstand the stress of when you're capping it. So anyway, all kinds of interesting things. I have no idea if like just the raw material component itself matters a lot. I know all resins and all metals are not the same price, and they honestly, how hard they are on your tools and how much time they take in production matters a lot too. So hashtag it's complicated. This is why I'm not a manufacturer. It's really complicated. And last question I have for y'all this week. This is from a Chazman, one on X. Is TWSBI going to come out with more colors to the Diamond 580 ALR, or is there going to be an upgraded or new model to that line of pen? A new 580 ALR, they just came out with one not too long ago, a blue one. Is there going to be another one? Probably. I mean, they've done a bunch of them already. I have no reason to think that they're done. You know, they seem to be popular enough. I'm not sure what or when. I don't have like insights into, you know, TWSBI's next projects. But I'm sure that there's something coming. Upgraded model. I don't know. They haven't upgraded. I mean, the last upgrade they did to the 580 was the 580 ALR. You know, so the 580, then they did 580 AL, and then they did the ALR. Is there some other ALR S or something? I don't know. I don't know what that would be, special. But I don't know. That would be kind of cool. I'd be open to that. I think it's a great pen. So I don't know, do some other stuff with it. Sure, TWSBI. It's easier for me to say. I don't have to make them. But, you know, I think that's totally up to them. I have no idea if they're going to do anything more than that, but I'm all for it. And that's what I got for y'all this week. So I got a lot of great questions on last week's video. Please keep asking questions. I'm just going to stockpile them. The more questions you ask, the better questions I have to pick from and the more interesting videos I can make. My question for the week this week, I'm going to go with a more businessy sort of question. Not super businessy, but we'll go with a businessy question thanks to your suggestion earlier, Suit Nut. So my question of the week for y'all this week is, which online retailer of any category, not just pens, but any online retailer, have you been regularly shopping with the longest? I'd be very curious. Me personally, the ones I've consistently shopped with the most for the longest have probably been ones related to our business. So like B&H, you know, they like sell photo and video gear. I bought from them for like 15 years now. Monoprice as well. They got really cheap cables and stuff like that. And then Uline, shipping supplies and stuff like that. Of course, we're a shipping company. So, you know, that makes a lot of sense too. So those are some of the ones that I can like think about that I've really been buying from for a long time. But I don't know, just kind of a curious question for you all as to who have you like relied, like who do you still rely on and still kind of, you know, buy from just kind of like bulk, and how long you've been buying from them. Just curious. So that's all I got for y'all this week. Here we are, 285. So got that done a week after 284. So can I do 286 next week? Who knows? I will unreliably commit. Let's see how it goes. Anyway, thank you for sticking around with me this week. Hope you enjoyed this. Thank you so much for watching, and